Hello and welcome back to the Old Soul Millennial channel. In today's video I'm going to complete some much needed repairs to the front porch here. This morning I've been pretty busy just getting set up to handle this big job that I've been dreading. So I set up this temporary tent to keep the sun off my back, brought out the workbench, brought out some tools. I find that it's much easier to tackle a big job that you've been dreading when you set yourself up properly to handle that job. So I think I'm reasonably well set up here. But anyway, back on topic. What's wrong with the porch and why do I need to work on it? Well, the porch has several issues. For one, the fascia board is rotted, so I'm going to replace the wood fascia board that's currently on the porch with some plastic fascia board. Plastic fascia board will never rot. I'll never have to paint it. It was very expensive, like $150 for a 24-foot span, so we're going to do that. The decking has a few issues. There's some pockets of rot, so as opposed to replacing the decking, I plan to repair that with some Bondo. Additionally, the decking needs to be painted, so we're going to need to sand that down and remove some of the old latex paint, try and strip that off. I bought some paint strippers, so we'll test that stuff out. I have some other tricks in the bag as well. What else? So the columns, the trim around the columns, there's a few pockets of rot on that trim. Additionally, some of the molding around the columns is rotted, so I plan to replace that as well. And then finally, the steps. For one, the ground where these steps sit on has sunk down and the railings have separated from the steps. Like if I go over here and just start rocking this, you can see it's like completely detached. So we're going to remove that. I'm going to try and get the ground pitched properly and brought back up to height, but that'll kind of be one of the last things I do here. So first things first, let's remove those steps and let's remove that detached railing. Here we have another classic case of no stainless steel fasteners and just 3 little nails holding this together. Yeah. So they put a ton of nails in this one, but I guess just over time everything corroded. Wow. Pretty severe. I need to figure out how to get these steps off. So I haven't even touched this yet, but look at this. I mean, this, I have a feeling I'm going to find some very shoddy craftsmanship behind these steps, so I'm going to continue on trying to figure out how to take this off. I wonder if we could just rip this off. Wow, that's bad. Bad. So I still haven't even removed any fasteners, but I'm pretty sure I could just pry it off like that. Oh, what do we have going on here? A mess. Absolute mess. Alright, no matter. Let's get this out of the way. Now I'm at the point where I need to remove this latex paint off the decking here. There's actually an original coat on the decking and then somebody just painted right over it, so we're going to try and remove at least the top coat. And I think the easiest way to do that is with this paint and varnish stripper. So the instructions state to spray a heavy coat and allow it to sit for a half hour. So let's go ahead and do that and see how well this stuff actually works. For this project, I have tried several different products. I've tried this paint stripper, which it worked somewhat. Some of the paint bubbled up, but it still takes a lot of elbow grease to get it off, and it's kind of slow, and those chemicals, I don't like to inhale those. Another method I tried was the heat gun. And the heat gun does work pretty well, but it's time consuming, it's very slow, and additionally, you're inhaling burning paint. I mean, of course, you could have the proper respirator that protects you. I don't have that. This is just a P100 filter, but that's one of the reasons why I don't like the heat gun. So I looked through my tools, and I remember doing an epoxy floor in the basement, and I had this tool, well, I do have this tool called a concrete surface grinder. It's basically like an angle grinder with a diamond tipped wheel that allows you to kind of burn off the top layer of concrete so that epoxy floor properly adheres. Well, I kind of stole that idea, and I decided to turn my angle grinder into something very similar. So this is a 4.5-inch angle grinder, and I did remove the guard, which is dangerous, and just understand the risks of doing that. But what I did, I basically took a flat disc, removed the guard, and now I have something very similar to that concrete surface grinder. except with this 4.5-inch angle grinder and this flap disc, this is much less abrasive. And the nice thing about this, you can hold this flat on the deck and sand down the surface smoothly and evenly. The only thing with this method, it does kick up a lot of dust, so I'd recommend having a full face respirator. This is a full face respirator with P100 filters, so you breathe in as little dust as possible. Also, I have an exhaust fan, well, a ventilation fan behind me that helps kind of push some of the dust out of here. But anyway, my technique, you know, this is similar to anytime you're sanding down concrete or wood or anything. You just don't want to leave it in one spot for too long. My specific technique, I like to do little circles, keep the thing moving, sometimes back and forth, straight lines. You definitely don't want to take this angle grinder and just hold it in one spot, because you'll start burning through the wood, you'll have a dip, and you don't want that. So keep the device moving, and it definitely seems to be the quickest and most effective way at removing latex paint off the decking. So well, it would appear that I burnt out the motor in my angle grinder. I have been pushing it pretty hard. It's been a heavy load on this guy, and I've had this for probably about 10 years now, but take a listen. It sounds awful. Maybe the brushes are just worn down or dirty. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe I'll take it apart one day. I have a second one, so I'll be fine, but I wanted to give you a final tip. If you're trying to get up close to the edge of a house or trim or molding or something like that, if you have air available, I have a compressor in the garage, I don't know, probably 60 feet of air line stretched out to the porch here. This is a really handy tool. This is a 90-degree pneumatic die grinder with a sandpaper disc. I think these are called roll locks, right? So it just kind of twist in there like so, but this is an excellent tool for getting the final inch or two in between the area that you've already sanded down and your house or molding or something like that. So this is nice because you can control the speed and you can choose different grits of sandpaper. I think this is maybe like a 80 grit or something like that, but it allows you to get up nice and close to the house. You know, I think you get the idea. It's just a better alternative than conventional sanding. So this is a really handy little tool. I'll leave a link for this down in the description below, and the roll lock discs. Here's an update after day one. I just finished sanding the deck, and I was also digging out some of the rot. I mean, you can see that it's somewhat extensive, but I think it's manageable. Just fill it in with Bondo, sand it down, maybe give it another coat of Bondo if needed. We'll just paint over it. Right?
Right.
Alright. Let's call it quits. I would like to teach you how to repair wood rot with Bondo. Thankfully, the pockets of rot are not on anything structural. Definitely do not utilize this type of repair on structural components. If it's structural, you definitely want to replace it. Talk to an engineer, a builder. Make sure you do that properly. So, what do you do first? Well, the first thing you need to do is dig out all the rot and let everything get good and dry. So I've chipped this out, I've dug out most of the rot, and this has been drying for a few days now. So now it's ready for Bondo. So what you're going to need to do is take your Bondo and mix it up. I'll show you how to mix this up. Let me set up the camera and then we'll go ahead and apply this. Apply our first coat. Alright, now let's talk about mixing. So my first recommendation is to purchase these Bondo applicators. So after you apply the Bondo to the rot or whatever surface, after the Bondo hardens, let it harden on this applicator, then take a scraper and it'll scrape right off. There's some type of chemical or super slick or something like that that prevents the Bondo from adhering to this applicator. So, you know, buy a 3-pack, a 6-pack, just utilize these. So we're going to mix up the Bondo on this piece of paper here. So what you're going to do, I like to use a spoon. we'll just put a few globs of Bondo on this piece of paper. You definitely want to mix this in smaller batches, especially if you haven't worked with this stuff before, you know. Build up your confidence a little bit. The thing with Bondo is you're racing the clock as soon as you apply the hardener, so you want to move pretty quick with this stuff. Just kind of looking at the size of the area I got to fill in and trying to match the amount of Bondo I'm putting on this piece of paper here. So that looks about right. Now what we're going to do is take our hardening cream, and I was always taught to put a straight line across your blob of Bondo like that. So now this is going to happen pretty quick, so I'm going to mix this up real quick. And I'm going to move the camera over real quick, and you'll just see that you gotta move pretty quickly with this stuff, because as soon as you let it sit, it begins to harden. You only have probably a minute of working time, something like that. So let's go ahead and mix this up. This is how I like to start mixing it up, just little circles. I'll take the applicator pad, do a little bit of this, chop it up, trying to get that nice, consistent, it's like a light green color, wipe it off on the edges. I'm just trying to make sure that all that gray's gone away. Wipe it off on the edge. Okay, this is ready. Let me move over the camera quickly. I mean, this is kind of similar to drywall in that your first coat is not going to be perfect, so don't expect it to be perfect, but you just want to kind of get the rough shape of whatever it is you're trying to fill in. So I need more in that hole right there. We'll just push this in. Come up from the bottom one more time. Yeah, I kind of wish I left a little bit more right there. Maybe we could take some from right here and just put it here. And again, you got to remember this is the first coat, so I'm not expecting this to be perfect. You know, it's one of those things where you don't want to mess with it too much. Just do a little scrape on the bottom here. A little bit more on my pad, so I'll probably scrape this off. It's definitely starting to harden a little bit here. We'll do a final little pass right there. Also, what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to pitch this a little bit so that if any water does fall on this, that it does come down this way. But this just used up all the Bondo that we had mixed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this harden. Should take about 15 minutes or something like that for this to harden. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to give it a quick sand. We'll give it a second coat, sand it down again, and then it should be ready for paint. This is just what I've been doing along the whole length of the porch here, so I have all that done and I just have a bit more to go here. So alright, so I just finished giving everything its first coat of Bondo. Now it's time to sand everything down. We'll see how it looks and then apply second coat where needed. And then some areas may require a third coat or fourth coat. It depends how perfect you want everything to look. I just want this to look as nice as possible. I'm not going for absolute perfection. But anyway, this is what I recommend in terms of PPE. This is a full face respirator with P100 filters. That way you're not breathing any of this dust. You don't want any of that in your lungs. For sanders, I have a few different tools. I have a, what is this, 5.5 inch or 6 inch orbital sander. I have a 3M sanding block over here. But for getting down here, this tight little nook and cranny, this is what I'm using. This is a right angle die grinder with roll lock disc. I'll leave a link for a tool like this in the description down below. But yeah, we're just going to sand this down and try and match the original shape, and we'll apply a second coat of Bondo. So let me put this respirator on and we'll get sanding. Alright, let's get this fascia off of here. Alright, and here are the final results after 2 coats of Bondo and sanding. I would say it's probably about 92% there. If you wanted to do a 3rd coat, you absolutely could, and you probably could bring it to about 98% there. But the paint's going to hide some of these small imperfections. Like, there's a small indentation there. But, I mean, compared to what it was, I mean, this is nice and solid now after you throw the paint on there. This is a repair that's going to last for many, many, many years. Now, I will say the most challenging part about a repair like this is getting this gentle contour at the bottom, right? Because we're going from this plane to this plane. Here's my tip for that. Sanding block, utilize the edge of the sanding block, right? Like, so you can get in here and work the sanding block like this and up and down, and you'll just have to play around with it. And additionally, for this contour, I was able actually to get a pretty decent contour with the orbital sander. And I know what you're saying, how's that possible? Well, if you take a look, see how the sandpaper overhangs where it attaches to the Velcro circle? So, I mean, as you're sanding, that sandpaper will actually bend down and create a small contour. I know it's kind of hard for me to show on camera, but you see how that sandpaper's kind of bending? So you can utilize that to help achieve a contour like that. Now, just be careful not to go too deep, because if you go too deep, then you're going to have to apply another coat. But anyway, I'm definitely making progress on this porch project. I'll be ready for paint tomorrow. I was hoping to finish this within 2 days, but that's not going to happen. The steps are probably going to have to be completed next weekend. But anyway, I was up at 5:30 this morning, got all the white trim and railings and back paneling painted. Just used a basic white semi-gloss latex paint, interior / exterior, and I'd say it came out pretty nice. I'll show you the Bondo repaired area. I mean, there's some imperfections. Probably could have used a 3rd coat, but I'm not worried about it. At least it's solid. Anyway, what I need to do now, I need to blow off the porch deck here, and then we're going to paint that. This is the stuff I picked up. This Valspar. That's going to be the color, which is pretty much going to match what was there. So let's get going on that. Paint's just drying a little bit here. Pretty darn happy with the results. Definitely a lot better than what it was, although I was wishing to be a bit further along with this project, but it is what it is. Gonna have to get some more material, and then next time I check back in, we'll start working on the steps here. I'm thinking the first thing that I need to do for the steps is to pour a pad. That way we have a nice solid base that's gonna last many, many years. So, it's a week later, all the paint has dried, and I'm extremely pleased with how this Bondo repair job came out. Deck looks terrific, but now we're on to the next phase. I need to start working on the steps here. I'm going to pour a concrete pad. I think that's the right way to go. These steps before were just sitting on the dirt ground and some bricks, and I want to build something that will last a very long time. I don't want to have it sitting on the ground and have it sink down and pull away like it did last time. So let's take a quick look at the steps. Now, unfortunately, even though that this is pressure treated wood, because it was sitting on that dirt, there is some rot. So I do plan to rebuild these at this point. It is what it is, it has to be done. But what I need to do first is I need to build this concrete pad. So let me set up the camera and the tripod, and we'll start getting this set up. Alright, so this definitely is not going to be a how-to video, but I'll show you kind of what's going through my head and how I plan to fix this issue. So first thing you'll notice is that I have a string line set up along the edge of the paver walkway. Now I'm going to use that as a guide because when I go to set this form, I want to make sure that that form doesn't encroach on the pavers. I want to make sure that there's a little bit of space in between the two, so that's what that's there for. And it also helps me to identify the height of the paver walkway. So in a moment here, I'm going to take these pavers, put them off to the side in the order that they're laid down, so that way I have room to work and room to lay down my form. Now another thing you'll note that I have set up is a laser. And the laser is in line with the bottom of this rim joist. So I've determined that the steps, or well, the pad rather, needs to be 17 inches below the bottom of this rim joist. And this laser is extremely helpful because I can go along the edges of the form and look for that green line and just figure out where 17 inches is. Another thing that I'm thinking as well is that I need to pitch this slab. It's really important that this is pitched a little bit away from the house. That way when it rains and snows, that moisture and water goes away from the house as opposed to back towards the foundation. So my form is 46 by 16, and I think we'll probably throw maybe a 1/4 inch pitch on that, just something like that, something to help keep the water away. So that is my plan. Let me start moving these pavers, and then we'll set the form in here, start digging it down, throw a little bit of gravel in the form, and then we'll mix up some concrete. Alright, I have my form set. There's about a 1/4 inch pitch from the back to the front, so hopefully that will help water drain away from the foundation. Have my masonry tools ready to go. Trowel, pool trowel. They call this a pool trowel with the rounded edges. Not sure which one I'm gonna like better. Have a screed, just a masonry brush, and an edger. So without further ado, let's go ahead and mix up some concrete. Alright, I'm no expert at finishing concrete, but the first thing we need to do is screed the top layer. And basically what that means, we're going to take a straight edge, work it back and forth, and just try and level out the concrete that's poured here. Obviously I poured too much into this form, but I'm fine with that. I guess I could push a little bit back if I need. Just work this side to side, just try and get everything all even. You can see there's a good bit of water in the concrete right now. It's way too wet for me to start finishing it, so what I need to do is just let it cure for a little while. We'll come back in, take the pool trowel, start smoothing it out a little bit, and then we'll work the edges, but we definitely need to let this set up a little bit longer. So it's been about a half hour since we initially screeded this, and as you can see there's less water on the surface. So from my understanding, that water is called bleed water, and as soon as that bleed water disappears from the top layer, that means that you're good to go ahead and start putting on the finishing touches. So I'm gonna give it a go right now. I see that pretty much all the bleed water is gone. So I'm using the pool trowel with the rounded edges, and basically my technique, I'm keeping this low and flat to the concrete, and as I go about it, I just keep the leading edge tilted up slightly. I'm just trying to smooth this out. Like I see, we need a little bit of fines in that spot right there, so I'm just gonna put a little pressure and bring a little bit that way. A little pressure off. A little bit of pressure, bring it to the back. Smooth it out. Oops. Little mistake. I think I'm pretty happy with that. So now we need to put the edges on this. I've never used an edger before, but we'll see how this goes. I'm not sure if it's okay where it's at. I think it's okay. We'll give it a shot. Anyway, with the edger, again, you want to keep the leading edge lifted up. So we're just going to hug the edge of the form here. Go over that again. This is going to be a problem. I got to get something over this. A little bit of a disaster. I had to get this tent over the concrete. I knocked some crud into the corner there, so let's see if we can get that out of there quick. So I think we're going to be okay, but there's too much water on the top surface, so I'm going to let this dry out a little bit, then we'll come back in and retouch up these edges. Weatherman said only a small passing shower. Thunder and lightning, just had to set up the cardboard. Just trying to save this pad. I think we'll be alright. Water's going off to the side now. I had the level as kind of a dam to help prevent the water from going there. Looks like that's a low spot right there and it's going off to the side, so I'm fine with that. What a mess. But you know, small little disasters like this make for good content. Alright, edges are starting to get hard. Can't wait any longer. Alright, we have some pretty nice edges. What I'm going to do now is just take a masonry brush and I'm going to lightly brush over this and just give it a little bit of a textured finish. Alright, I just put the finishing touches on this pad, so just to kind of recap, we poured the pad, we screeded it, leveled everything off, we let that surface water dry, then we came back with the pool trowel, which has the rounded edges, we smoothed everything out, and then once everything started to firm up just a little bit more, took our edger, did the edges, took the brush, brushed over everything. And then the final thing I did, after I brushed it, I went over the edges one more time to smooth out the edges and give that nice rectangular look. I think that's what's in right now, so I'm happy with how this came out. We'll let it dry overnight, and then we'll see if we can get these stairs put together tomorrow. In today's video, I would like to teach you how to measure, calculate, and lay out the dimensions for your own custom stairway stringers. Now, first thing I want to get out of the way is that I'm not a design professional. Before you attempt a project like this, please consult with your local building department. You may need a permit, you may need a set of approved plans, so just ensure that whatever you build is to your local codes, laws, and regulations. I'm, of course, not liable for whatever you build. So with that out of the way, and a second thing I've done is I've added an extension to my rim joist. So this is the main rim joist, and this is my rim joist extension. So behind here I have a couple of pressure-treated 4x4s, and these, well, the rim joist extension is attached to that pressure-treated 4x4 with 5.5 inch long Simpson structural screws. If you've never tried them before, they are absolutely incredible, extremely strong, expensive, but totally worth it. And then additionally, there is some lateral bracing from the 4x4s back to the foundation of the house. So I have a really strong spot to secure my stringers to, and I have a really nice, properly pitched, solid foundation for these stringers to sit on. So once I construct this, this should last for many, many years. And additionally, stringers should definitely be pressure-treated wood as well. But first question I want to answer is, you know, you go to the big box stores and you see that they normally have pre-cut stringers. Can you just use those? Well, maybe you can, but chances are if you're working with something like this where you're trying to reconstruct what was there originally, chances are that won't work. If you want to play it safe, you're going to have to cut your own stringers. Now, I spent many hours going through all the information online trying to figure out what the easiest way to make my own custom set of stringers was. And there wasn't a whole lot of really helpful, clear, detailed information out there, so that's the purpose of this video. I've actually been working on these instructions all morning, so this video should prove to be very helpful. We'll go over all the dimensions and measurements that you need to take in order to properly calculate these stringers. So the first two measurements that we need are the total run and the total rise. So the two spots we're going to be measuring from are the top face front edge of the concrete, so right here, and the other spot we're going to be measuring from is at the top of the rim joist, underneath the decking back here. So first thing I figure we'll measure the total run, and that's going to be from the rim joist here to the front of the concrete pad. That square represents a 90-degree angle, so I'm going to move the camera and I'll show you how to measure that. So tools you're going to need to get these two measurements: one, a level, and additionally a tape measure. So to get our total run, we're going to measure off the face of this concrete back to the rim joist. So I'm going to take my level, put it against the face of the concrete, ensuring that the bubble is in the middle of the two lines. I'm going to take my tape measure, and on the same side of the level that's resting on the face of the concrete, I'm going to take a measurement off the rim joist here. I'm going to see what that measurement is. So I'm getting 19 inches. So that tells me my total run is 19 inches. The second thing we need to calculate or measure is our total rise. Now the total rise is from the top surface of the concrete slab or whatever it is you're resting your stringers on, and the top of the rim joist, or the underside of where the decking connects to the rim joist. So in order to do that, we're going to take our level. I'm going to put it on the underside of the decking like so, ensuring that the level is level. Take a measurement off the face, the top face of the concrete, and I am getting 23.5 inches. So my total run is 19 inches, and my total rise is 23.5 inches. All right, I'm going to try and keep this as simple as possible. So what we're going to need 4 measurements. First thing we're going to need to figure out is what we want our step height to be. The step height is basically from the underside of the rim joist to the top side of your stringer. So this black line, this black line. Something that you want to be careful of, though, and pay attention to is the thickness of your step boards and the thickness of the decking on top of the rim joist. I'm pretty sure most codes say that the difference in step height can be no more than 3/8 of an inch. So if that is in fact the case in your local jurisdiction, just be careful, ensure that the step boards are within 3/8 of an inch thickness of the decking, if that makes sense. So anyway, our step height is 8 inches. Next thing we need to calculate is what our step board width is. So in my case, I'm going to have 2 step boards side by side, and their total width is 11 inches. Pretty simple. Next thing we need to measure is our kickboard thickness. And these are the kickboards. They sit on top of the step boards, and they get screwed to the vertical face of the stringers. So the kickboards, in my case, are going to be a 1/2 inch thick, and they are going to be plastic. I recommend you go with the plastic stuff. Try and avoid the wood stuff, because you'll just end up replacing it, 10 years down the road. The plastic lasts a lifetime. And the final measurement we're going to need to figure out is what we want our step board overhang to be. So see, we have our step boards. How much do we want that to overhang the kickboards? In my case, I want it to be 1 inch. Now that we have those measurements out of the way, now we need to do a few simple calculations. But first things first, because we know our step height is going to be 8 inches, we know our rise is going to be 8 inches. So remember that number, 8 inches, because we're going to use that very shortly here. Now to calculate the run, which the run is going to be from this black line to this black line right here, what we need to do is we need to subtract the kickboard thickness, which is a 1/2 inch, and then we also need to subtract the desired step board overhang. So this is the step board overhang in blue right here. So we have the kickboard thickness, 1.5 inches, and overhang thickness, 1 inch. So from our step board width, 11 inches, we're going to subtract 1.5 inches, and that tells us that our run will be 9.5 inches. So from this black line to this black line will be 9.5 inches. So now we have our 2 critical numbers, which is 8 inches and 9.5. Alright, now I'm going to try and explain this the best that I can. Hopefully this is pretty easy to understand. So earlier we measured our total rise. Our total rise is a measurement from the concrete pad to our rim joists. The top of the rim joists are underside of the decking. So the total rise is 23.5 inches. And a moment ago, we also determined that we want each individual step to have a rise of 8 inches. So what we need to do now is determine how many times 8 goes into 23.5. Now, you do not want to divide this. If I divided 23.5 by 8, it would give me 2.9. We do not want this in decimal form. We want this to remain in inches. Everything is in inches right now. So the easiest way to determine how many times 8 goes into 23.5 is simply to subtract 8 inches, 1 8-inch measurement at a time. So we have 23.5 minus 8. That's our first. That'll give us 15.5. Now we take 15.5 minus 8. That'll be our second. Leaves us with 7.5. And we can't subtract 8 from 7.5 because it would leave us with a negative number. So we've determined 1, 2, 3. Now if you look at this drawing over here, this will kind of hopefully put it all together. So this is the rim joist right here. This is the decking. So from the top of the rim joist, underside of the decking, down to the top of the first step on the stringer, that's going to be 8 inches. Then the second step on the stringer is going to be 8 inches. Then the final step is going to be 7.5 inches. So if we add these all up, 8, 16, 23.5. So these 3 measurements give us our total rise, so that is properly calculated. Now the other question you may have is, what about our run? Well, earlier we determined that our run is going to be 9.5 inches, and that's going to stay consistent. You're going to have 9.5 inches here and 9.5 inches here. So hopefully that makes sense. Now let's go over to a pressure-treated 2x12 and let's lay this out. So essentially this is the piece we're going to be making right here. 9.5 inches, 9.5 inches, so those are our 2 runs. Then we have an 8-inch rise and a 7.5-inch rise. Now, a question you may be asking yourself is, well, your total rise is 23.5 inches. You only have 15.5 inches between these 2 rises right here. What about the last 8 inches? Well, if you take a look at this diagram right here, this should answer your question. So the final 8 inches of rise is going to be achieved by the pre-existing rim joist. So pretty simple. What we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to measure this out utilizing a framing square. Now, my piece of 2x12 is not large enough for me to show you on, so I'm just going to show you on this piece of plywood, but it's really simple. You should have no problems with this. So utilizing my framing square, because my rise is going to be 8 inches, I'm looking for 8 inches, and then my run is going to be 9.5 inches, so I'm going to be looking for this mark right here. I'm going to take my framing square, start in an upper corner, so this is going to be lined up on the 8, and then this is going to be 9.5 inches, so that'll give me the proper angle. And they do make little screw tabs that kind of screw and hold your square in place. I don't have those, so I'm just going to work with what I have. So 9.5 inches, we'll mark that out. And we'll do the same thing again. 8 inches on this mark, and 9.5 inches on the edge of the board here. While we're here, this is going to be the final step right here. This is going to be right here. So you remember, this is only going to be 7.5 inches. So what we can actually do, we can actually mark off 7.5 inches, right? Because this is 8 inches, so we're going to actually, from this line, measure back up a 1/2 inch. So this is actually 7.5 inches. So we can use that later. Now, we need to get a parallel line from this 7.5 inch mark to this line right here. How do you do that? Well, you could take the square and you could work it this way, but a much better way, a more accurate way, is just repeat what we were doing. So we were using 8 and 9.5 inches. So simply go to the other edge of the board, go to your 8 and 9.5 inches, and slide that down. That lines up with that 7.5 inch mark that we made earlier. Then you can scribe this line. So now we have a bottom rise of 7.5 inches. Now for this top line right here, this should be 9.5 inches, and what I need to do, I need to scribe a line coming down this way. And another easy way to scribe that line down is to simply use the same measurements that we've been using. So I'm going to use 8, then 9.5, and we'll line everything up. Just scribe this line down. You know that this is an excess, 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 and this is going to be our stringer. Now this piece of plywood is wider than a normal 2x12. It's actually 14.5 inches, so I actually drew this line right here to represent what the dimensions of a nominal 2x12 would look like. Now this is one of the 2x12 stringers that I cut out yesterday. Now let's take this piece over to that piece of plywood and let's see if it matches the lines I just scribed out. And there is the 2x12 we just had on our hands laid out over the lines we just scribed in the plywood, and it's pretty well a perfect match. I will say I did have a little bit of trouble cutting these 2x12s, and that's why they may look like they're slightly off from the lines. What I learned is that these pressure treated 2x12s, if they're extremely waterlogged, avoid using the skill saw. Go ahead and use a jigsaw. You'll thank me later. My skill saw was jamming up in there and I was just having a hell of a time, but jigsaw will work much better. Alright, so I'm making some good progress here. As you can see, I have these stringers attached to the extended rim joist, and I have the stringers attached to the extended rim joist with some Simpson strong tie brackets specifically designed for this application. The part number for those brackets, LSCZ, highly recommended. So what I'm currently working on is installing the posts, or at least the post brackets, right? So these posts are going to be for the railings. Pretty critical part of this project. I think according to code, these have to be designed as to where they resist 200 pounds of force. So I'm trying to engineer these as stout as possible. And I'm going to start with this product right here. This is another Simpson strong tie bracket, part number ABA44Z. And what these are going to do a few things. For one, they're going to keep the post off the concrete, which will hopefully help to prevent decay. Additionally, it's going to secure our stringers and posts directly to the concrete slab. And what we're going to do in order to attach this to the concrete slab is we're going to use an expanding anchor bolt right here. So what I need to do now, I already did the one on the other side. I have my hammer drill. I have this marked out, so I'm going to hammer drill out this hole, and then we're going to insert our expanding anchor bolt, tap that down, tighten it up, install the bracket, and then we'll move on from there. So I just cut this blocking, and the purpose of this blocking is for, well, for one, to tie everything together, but mainly for these tension brackets. So these tension brackets are going to attach to the blocking like so. Hole's going to be drilled through the stringer, and a hole's going to be drilled through the post. So there's going to be 2 through bolts on that post, one for this tension bracket, and then one just holding it down to the stringer. But I think that should be adequate. I could always throw another structural screw in there too if I so choose. But as for attaching this blocking to the stringer, I have these angle brackets, and I'm going to put these on the back side like so. So let me do that now. I had the first couple of steps installed, and I just notched out this piece of fascia. So let's see if we can get this to fit in here. Cut it very tight, so I'm not 100% sure it's going to fit.
Okay.
How far out is it?
An inch? No, but wait, I have to move this. Okay, go.
I want it out like an inch.
Okay, go. Like 2. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's an inch.
Alright, you're relieved. So I just want to show you what I engineered here before I cover it up with decking. So behind the blocking, I have these angle brackets back here. So that secures the blocking to the stringers. Then I have these deck and guardrail tension tie plates. These are made by Simpson. These are a fantastic product. So this is, well, the bracket's secured to the blocking, but then there's a 1/2 inch through bolt that goes through the stringer to the other side of the post. And then I decided to use a full piece of 1/2 inch rod and just through bolt everything. And there's nuts and washers on either side of every stringer. And this makes these posts extremely strong, but additionally, it makes it really easy to adjust these if these are out of level this way or this way. For example, if the post was flared outward at the top a little bit, and you just tighten up this bolt, and that helps to bring the post back in. And of course we have the concrete attachment brackets, so this attaches the 4x4 post to the concrete. It keeps it spaced off the ground, and then this is, I'm sure you guys remember, that's just bolted on with an expanding anchor bolt. So that's what this looks like. This is extremely strong. I'm really pleased with how this is coming out. So now I'm going to cover this up with decking, and then we'll get on to the handrails. Alright, I'm working on the railings now. I believe the code is that the height of the railings have to be between 30 to 34 inches off the steps. Again, check your local laws and regulations to ensure that you comply with code, of course. But I want to talk about how to cut the angle, how to cut these rails. So what I was doing, or what I am doing, pretty simple. I'm just taking some clamps, clamping the rails onto the posts, and then I'm double checking that the posts are level. So what I'll do, I'll come back in with my 2-foot level, just double check that the posts are level. And then once I know everything's level and set in the proper position, I go to the other side of the rail, take a pencil and just scribe a line along the post, and that gives me the proper angle and measurement that I need to cut these rails at. So I'm going to go ahead and unclamp this, go cut this, and then we'll install this side. Coming out pretty nice. Alright, now I'm going to show you how to custom cut your balusters. So now that we have the railings installed, first thing we have to do is determine what the spacing is going to be for the balusters. Now, the way I determined the spacing is I took a measurement from post to post, and I determined that this was about 24 inches. So for me, I wanted the spacing of the balusters to be every 6 inches. Of course, check your local codes. So we have one 6, 12, 18, and then finally the top post. Now that we have those center marks for the balusters, what you need to do is take a little torpedo level and make a plumb line on where that mark is going to be. So plumb line on the 6, plumb line on the 12, plumb line on the 18. And after you make that plumb line, we need to figure out what the thickness of your baluster is going to be. In my case, it's about 1.5 inches. So I measured 3/4 of an inch on either side of that center mark, and then I took the torpedo level again and drew plumb lines. So now these lines right here represent where the baluster is going to go, because we've accounted for the thickness, and now we know the spacing. Now the final thing that we need to do is we need to take one of these lines and scribe it down on the lower railing. That way we can ensure that all the balusters are going to be plumb. So the way I did that, took my 3-foot level, I chose to scribe off the forward mark. I just lined up the top, ensure that the level was plumb, like so, and just took a pencil, scribed the line on the bottom, and then put an X on the side which the baluster is going to go on. Hopefully that makes sense. So now we know the spacing, and now we know each baluster is going to be plumb, and we know where to install it. So the final thing that you really need to do is you need to clamp it against your rails, figure out where this is going to be about centered, and then just simply scribe the backside while it's lined up with our plumb lines. Hopefully that makes sense. It makes sense in my mind. Another tip I have, if your railings are off and you have to individually scribe each baluster, like in my case, I'd recommend numbering each baluster. So over here I have a little numbering chart, 1, 2, 3, so this is going to be number 1, number 2, and number 3, so that way after I scribe these and I cut these, when I come back over, I know exactly where they go. Now, as for attaching these balusters to the railings, I mean, there's 1,000 ways to do it. My personal preference, I'm using these stainless steel trim screws. I like that they'll never rot. You do see the heads, but I'm not really concerned about that. So I'm in the final stages now. Now I need to reinstall these bricks that I took out earlier. I'd suppose it'd be better to use some stone dust, but I don't have any. I have some masonry sand, so I'm just going to use this stuff. Alright, we're just about out of daylight, but I wanted to show you the finished product. Well, it's not quite finished. So this pressure-treated lumber, this actually needs to dry for a period of 2 to 3 months before you really can apply latex paint to it. So I'm going to let this dry for a few months, and then I'm going to come back and give it a nice coat of white, give it a light sand, and just have it match everything else. Another thing I would like to note is that I ended up reusing the old kickboards. So, you know, the lower two steps, they're not as nice as the new fascia board that I installed. Sorry, camera's getting out of focus a little bit, but another thing, I had to leave a little bit of a gap on the bottom just because I was reusing the old fascia boards, but in a way I actually think that works out because you can't really see it, but I can see the concrete pad under there, and that just allows anything that collects behind there to run out, so that way it's not sitting back there. Allows water, ice to drain away from the slab, so I almost think it's a good thing. It's just not the prettiest looking thing. Another small critique is that these PVC fascia boards, again, because I was reusing the old kick boards, they don't extend all the way out to the 4x4 post, but I figure once you throw a coat of paint on it, it won't be a big deal. But these posts are super strong. You know, there's a little bit of flex in there, especially because these are turned down, but that bottom portion of the post does not move anywhere. And I think it was the right call using the stainless steel fasteners. Some people are probably going to give me flack for screwing through the top, but I think that gives the strongest connection to the balusters. And I was very careful. They're just ever so slightly recessed beneath the face of this rail. So, I mean, you're never going to catch a finger on it, and it's nice because if you ever need to remove one of the balusters for maintenance or whatever, you can just zip that out and be on your way. So, it's great to finally conclude this project. I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and as always, we'll catch you on the next one.